All right. Happy Sunday, family. How we doing today? So I'm solo today. This is kind of, we're going back to the original concept of what the show was, which was me finding books and material and all kinds of things that I have had to study and learn. So this week I don't have a guest, so we're doing it this way. So we'll have some more, but it's summer. People are graduating, their kids are busy, they've got family stuff. So we're probably going to be doing some more books this summer. If you have certain ones that you want me to look into, please reach out, drop a line in the chat and let me know. 5 by 5 on all. Thank you, Ash. Thank you so much, dear. So I've had this one for a while and I hadn't read it all the way through. I'd started it and then I would get busy with other projects. But this is a book that came out in 22 from a Belgian scientist, and it's called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. So I thought, since, it's an election year, and I'm pretty sure that we're rolling into what they would like to be bird flu season. I can't not find this stuff funny. I don't know if anybody else there shares my quirky humor on that. Not that I enjoy what we've had to live through, but I try and keep my humor through everything. So let's start with looking at, let me flip some buttons around here. This is the book itself. Let me make this a little bigger here. Pick a better one. Here we go. Okay, obviously Amazon homepage, but I want you to see the cover of the book, what it was, in case you would like to go and investigate and do more research on this. We're going to talk about this, and I have clips of him doing an interview with Tucker Carlson. I went out to YouTube because this gentleman has been all over the place doing all kinds of interviews because he is one of the experts in this area. And there's tons of videos out there. If you want to hear more from him, go out to YouTube and just type in his name. You will find endless podcasts. And I found his work fascinating. And I think now is probably the best time for us to go over this because hindsight is 2020 on the year 2020, if you catch my drift. So in this book, he will analyze and he goes through psychology from how infants adjust to how children adjust to how you develop a narcissistic personality to how you develop some of these other things and how they all play in when you're dealing with a mob mentality, how that shifts. And he takes reference and looks back through time. So he's looking at the French Revolution, off with their heads. That's the first really big. We're lucky we didn't get that crazy, but that's the first one. Then you had the Bolsheviks, and you had the overthrowing of Russia, which led to the communism, the Soviet Union, all of that. The other really big one that he talks about, obviously, is World War II. And I remember as a child, and let me know if anybody out there in the chat can relate to this, but when you were a kid and you studied World War II, and it was, your history class and whatever, middle school, and you probably talked about it a bunch more in high school and stuff. I'm sure everyone sitting there with you in your class, you thought, I would have been the one to stand up. I would have defended Anne Frank. I would have helped everyone. I don't know why they could have just turned their neighbors in and done all that. I remember acutely thinking that by 21 and looking around at my neighbors and going, oh my God, what have they done? What has happened to everybody? Why are they crazy? Why are people, why are people driving around wearing paper masks when they're alone in their car? Like why are people wearing masks in their house with their spouse? Like you can't protect yourself from your spouse. I'm here to tell you, I've been married a very long time. You can try and, like if they catch a cold, you try and keep your distance a little bit, but you live with them. Like you a paper mask is not going to help you. It's like suddenly everybody forgot what an airborne virus was, how it was transmitted, like what the size of particles are and why that matters because they just go right through the mask they're telling you to wear. I mean, just all of these things. And I would look up the information, the verified data, and if anybody bothered me, I would be like, "Well, actually, here's the correct data, here's this and all." And they wouldn't believe me because I didn't have scientists tattooed to my forehead. I don't know if anybody out there can relate to my experience on this, but it was very frustrating to be a logical adult that pretty intelligent, pretty good at researching, had research at my fingertips that I could pull up on my phone, and I was treated like a crazy person. So, for those out there that are just now looking back at the crazy, now that we're having all the data, if you're paying attention, Congress keeps dragging all of these officials in because they keep getting their FOIA documents that they tried to delete because it proves that they knew what they were doing. They funded this mess, they created this mess, they did this to us. They knew. That would be the only thing that I would disagree with about this book. There is part of one chapter in it where he's talking about um, the conspiracy that this was a global plot because that was talked about from the beginning there, and thank goodness it was, but everybody was deplatformed and everything like that. From the interviews I have seen from this gentleman now, and I watched ones even up to date of that were published last month. I do not believe he still thinks that. So if you get this book, that would be the only area that I would disagree with him on. And to be fair, he's a person that was employed at a university and that was his life work, was research and teaching and doing all of that. So if you've been around people like that, they're very I can't think of another word other than normal. Like they're the normal mentality of everything. So the way he was framing it in you shouldn't have one extreme or the other, which is fair. And I do agree with him on that. He was saying, you shouldn't have one extreme or the other. Like it neither is healthy. So if you have the extreme totalitarian, you know, everything must be done this way, whether it matters or not, by rituals and things. But then if you have the other end where this other group over here believes nothing, absolutely nothing. And quite a few of us are closer to this end at this point. But again, he would have been writing this in 2021 because it was published in the beginning of 22. So I'm giving that caveat out there because, and again, we're talking like 15 pages, maybe less in the book where he mentions it. This was a stellar book. I really do recommend the book. Very detailed, very good work. Um, he's a Belgium, and he actually he had a master's in psychology, and that was his area, and then he was working in the universities and doing all the things, and then he started noticing the fact that 85% of the data that they were relying on was crap. So he started to get fascinated with the fact that peer reviews and everything that we're for those of us that are not in the science world, we're constantly told, "Oh, well, this is a peer-reviewed study. This is the blah, blah, blah." So we assume adhering to these particular standards, that everything is happening surely according to a platform and things. There must be rules for how they do this, right? Like all of us that aren't involved in that, we just, your regular citizen, we all assume this is what they're doing, but it's not. So this gentleman went back and he got his master's in statistics. So then this was by 2003. Then he became hyper focused on making sure, sorry. Yep, okay, that's fixed. Making sure that he was analyzing the data and calling it out, and he was trying to do it in a very polite way, but as you can imagine, his colleagues were not thrilled with hearing that all the data that they build everything in their life on isn't right. That did not bring them comfort. So they were not very, very happy with him about that. But this really was an interesting book. And I picked one interview that I really liked, and we may skip around a little bit. I'll probably pause a lot and reference the book and the parts of the book and how this plays in, and then just my personal experience looking back at the hysteria. But there are certain conditions that have to be met. So what he's talking about is mass formation psychosis. So how do you convince a large group of people to have groupthink? What conditions must exist for that to happen? This is fascinating to me. I hope you all find it fascinating. You must have a large degree of fear and anxiety. And you must create it to the level that they are hyper focused on their own fear and anxiety. And then you present them the cause of their fear, not necessarily that it actually is. That's not relevant. You just tell them over and over, this is why you don't feel good. This is why you're afraid. And then you direct them to whatever solution you want. So I'll use COVID as the example. Oh my God, you can't go out. You have to quarantine. You have to do all this stuff. Oh, well, if you just take the vaccine, then all your anxiety, then you can go back to your normal life. Everything will be fine. Just take the thing. Okay. Don't pay any attention that we changed the definition, that we changed the rules, that, we didn't actually get the emergency order legally. Shh. No. Just take the thing. Don't ask questions. Oh, no, you can't see an ingredients list. Silly thing. No. You can't see, the test data for it. No, you can't. No, of course, there's no side effects. I mean, what are you talking about? There's only, 1,090 side effects they hid from us. Why is anyone having problems? Yeah. So then you give them that solution. Okay. So the vaccine's the solution. Then you say to them, oh, well, see this other group, they're not complying. They're not behaving. You're never going to get your life back. Your life will never be the same. You'll never be able to do what you want to do. You'll be living in complete anxiety and isolation and all this other stuff unless you get rid of them, those dirty anti-vaxxers. Yeah. His work is epic. He also has a Substack. I really do recommend that. But again, the book is great. He's working on his second. I watched an interview actually just a little bit ago that he did with Dr. Drew, which was really pretty good. I think that one was from like a month ago. But I have one that he did on Tucker. And that's the one I want to take a look at. And like I said, I will be pausing quite a bit during it. And I, as always, will be interacting with the chat. I'm trying to monitor on all platforms. I'm on 6 right now, so I'll be looking all over the place. So, all right, let me pull up the right one here. How we doing out there, chat? Hey, Mean Bear One, or Mean One Bear. I apologize. I said that wrong. Ash, Duppy, my buddies, all my peeps. All right, let's take a look at this. All right. It hasn't, the streaming platform has a new design. So every time I switch, it defaults to this one, whether I wanted it or not. Kind of fun. Ugh. Well, that's fine. Whatever. It'll be all right. Let's get that.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today, things have changed so fast in the United States that it's hard to understand exactly what is happening. And one of the reasons it's hard to understand what's happening is that we don't have words for what is happening. You can't understand something unless you can describe it. Words are the first step to understanding. So the country began to change in very obvious ways right around the time George Floyd died, Memorial Day 2 years ago in Minneapolis. And all of a sudden, you saw large groups of people acting in what seemed to be perfect synchronicity with one another as one. and then trying to enforce a uniformity of opinion on the rest of the country. And the rest of the country, for the most part, went along with it. Nothing like this had ever happened in America, certainly not in our lifetimes. What were we watching? Something new and different, for sure. Also something self-evidently threatening to our most basic freedoms and to our human dignity. So what was it? Well, it wasn't really until December of 2021, in a broadcast of the Joe Rogan Experience, that a doctor called Robert Malone described in words what we may have been watching. Here was that clip, which instantly became famous.
What the heck happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s? You know, very intelligent, highly educated population, and they went barking mad. And how did that happen?
Yep.
The answer is mass formation psychosis. When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety and a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it, and then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis, they literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere.
So Malone goes on to attribute that idea at the core of his description, something called mass formation, to an academic in Belgium called Matthias Desmet, who wrote a book on it, actually, called The Psychology of Authoritarianism. And I want to put a quote up on the screen that gets to the nut of what he's describing. And we're quoting. Mass formation is, in essence, a kind of group hypnosis that destroys individuals' ethical self-awareness and robs them of their ability to think critically. This process is insidious in nature. Populations fall prey to it unsuspectingly. To put it in the words of Yuval Noah Harari, quote, most people wouldn't even notice the shift toward a totalitarian regime. We associate totalitarianism mainly with labor, concentration, and extermination camps, but those are merely the final bewildering stage of a long process. So those words come from, as we just said, a Belgian academic called Matthias Desmet, who we are honored to have join us on the set now to describe what all of us have been watching for the last 2 years. But Professor, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Is it a little strange to find out that you're famous in the United States?
Yes, a little bit, yes.
So 10 years ago, I think this would have been considered a kind of esoteric academic theory, you know, relevant to your specific study, but not really relevant to the society that we live in. And all of a sudden, you've so perfectly described what the rest of us have been watching. So before we get into it, if you just tell us who you are and where you're from and how you wound up concluding this.
Yes, well, I'm from Belgium, as you said. I'm a professor in clinical psychology at Ghent University. I also have a master in statistics. And that's actually how
statistics?
In statistics, yes.
Huh.
Yeah. I did a PhD on methodological problems in academic research. I started my PhD in 2003 when it became clear that up to 85% of the academic papers is seriously flawed. That's what my PhD was all about. And then, when the corona crisis started, I immediately started to study the statistics a little bit. And I immediately got the impression that the mathematical models and the statistics that were used dramatically overrated the dangerousness of the virus. And then, in my opinion, a few months later, by the end of May 2020, this was actually proven beyond doubt. At that moment, the initial mathematical models on which the corona measures were based, the models issued by Imperial College, predicted that by the end of May 2020, in a small country such as Sweden, about 60,000 people would die if the country didn't go into lockdown. And Sweden didn't go into lockdown, and only 6,000 people died. And at that moment, for me, in the first week of the corona crisis, I published 2 opinion papers in which I tried to warn people that there was something dangerous out there. And I wasn't referring to the virus. The title of the first paper was "The Fear of the Virus is More Dangerous Than the Virus Itself." And strangely enough, I tried to show people in what way the statistics were wrong, but nobody really seemed to care about it. And everybody continued to buy into the narrative. And even when, by the end of May 2020, it was proven beyond the shade of a doubt that the mathematical models had been dramatically wrong, the narrative continued, and the society continued to behave as if the mathematical models had been right. And that was the moment for me when I switched my perspective. At that moment, I decided to focus on the psychological mechanisms that could explain why an entire society couldn't see anymore that the narrative they believed in was blatantly absurd in many respects. And it took me 1 or 2 months before I could, in my opinion, pinpoint it, and before I started to understand that what we were dealing with was a large-scale process of mass formation, which is like a kind of group formation, which has some very strange effects at the level of individual psychological functioning. The most important being probably that people who are in the grip of such a process, in one way or another, lose all capacity to take a critical distance of what the group believes in, and this can go extremely far. Like during the revolution in Iran in 1979, which was a large-scale process of mass formation in Iran, people started to believe that the portrait of the Ayatollah, whom they considered a leader, was printed on the surface of the moon. And when there was a full moon in the sky, they typically were standing in the streets showing each other where exactly you could see the portrait of the Ayatollah. That's the first strange effect
What?
at the level of individual psychological functioning of a process of mass formation.
Has anybody else heard that?
And Iran in 1979 was
What
not a
is that?
backward, remote country. It was a very westernized, very well-educated, sophisticated country.
Of course, the level of education doesn't play any role, even not the intelligence. Even more, the higher the level of education, the easier, the more vulnerable people are for mass formation.
Okay, let me just back up a step. So
Okay, I want to highlight that real quick. What he's saying is the more educated, so the higher the college degrees and whatever, the more vulnerable they are to this psychosis. Now, there's many theories why. It could be just, you've just spent longer in the indoctrination chain, because that's really what the school system is. That's a different podcast. We can go into that. But, you just sit there, you memorize and you repeat, and you do it for decades. So perhaps the longer you're in the system, maybe the more vulnerable you are to that. You have more that you're told, this is an authoritarian, this is an expert. So maybe having experts like Fauci and different ones like that constantly telling them, perhaps that's it. I don't know for sure. There's many theories on that. But in my own personal experience, even now, the people I know that still are wearing masks and babbling about this stuff and getting their boosters are the people I know with PhDs. The regular people, even the people that just have a 4-year degree, they're not on board with this. And this is just my personal walking around my town experience. But the ones I know that have PhDs, they're still not, they still can't come to grips, even after everything is coming out legitimately. Like it's not some weird website. These are government documents that are coming out, and they still can't see it. It still is mind-blowing to me. Anybody is susceptible, but man, the higher the education, the worse they are. Thank you, Lance, for the 1,000 gold pills. Happy Sunday, friend. Call it intellectual insecurity, Duppy. People who want a recipe for, yeah, fair. Yeah. Hi, Scott17. Love my fam. They're fabulous. All right. I just wanted to
So
point
you
that
said
out.
in 2003, you began your PhD, and your main focus was the fact, and you described as a fact, that 85% of academic papers had serious flaws within them.
Yeah.
Now, 85% is the overwhelming majority.
Yeah, that's
academic papers are the basis of academia. So
science is trash.
I mean, that's a shocking. So maybe that was the first example you saw of mass formation, because how could they not fix that?
Yes, well, I published a small book about that in which I tried to show in a very tangible and concrete and simple way why most research methods impossibly can lead to valid results. And what I noticed was my examples were really clear and tangible. Everyone who wanted to see it could see that the methods could only lead to flawed results. And to my surprise, only about 5% of my colleagues wanted to open their eyes and wanted to see what I was showing. And the rest
Now think about all of the heads of colleges that we've seen in the last few months that are getting in trouble for plagiarizing. The dean of all of our most esteemed ones, like Harvard, turns out they've all been cheats all this time. So of course, they wouldn't have wanted to acknowledge the fact that the data is flawed. They've been just writing numbers in and apparently just making shit up this whole time, and acting from an air of superiority. Like the mask is peeling off.
didn't want it. And that was the moment when I started to think about what could possibly explain why people became so blind. And that was the moment when I first started to be interested in mass formation. And exactly the same process repeated itself in the corona crisis. I immediately noticed, look, these statistics and these mathematical models can be right. I tried to show it, didn't work, and then started to think about what psychological processes could explain that. And I stumbled upon, or I tried to re-articulate my theory on mass formation in public space then.
We had the same experience
Exactly
in the United States. On the show in the spring of 2020, it became clear that the original Imperial College predictions, which were the basis of our public policy here in the United States, were completely wrong, and nobody cared. In fact, they reacted with hostility if you pointed it out.
Absolutely.
So just the predicate here, the background. You pointed to 1979 as an example where this happened in another country with a large group of people. Is this a feature of history? Have we seen this a number of times?
Mass formation has existed as long as mankind exists. So there, we've had the Crusades, the witch hunts, the French Revolution, then the mass formations in the Soviet Union, the mass formations in Nazi Germany. So it has existed as long as mankind exists. But for a specific reason, the mass formations became stronger and stronger and stronger throughout the last few hundreds of years. And that's interesting because in the first half of the 20th century, the masses became so strong that, led by certain leaders, they could seize control of the state apparatus. And that's how totalitarian states emerge.
Yes.
Totalitarian states, Hannah Arendt says, are always a diabolic pact between the masses and their leaders. It's a diabolic pact between the masses and their leaders, and in this way, like a completely new kind of state emerges, which is completely different from a classical dictatorship. In a classical dictatorship, there is a small group of people, a dictatorial regime, who has such an aggressive potential that people are so scared of them that they can impose unilaterally their social contract to society.
Yes.
But the totalitarian state emerges in a completely different way. In a totalitarian state, there is first a process of mass formation, which is a process through which a certain part of the population, usually about 30%, fanatically starts to believe in a certain ideology. And this phenomenon can be created artificially through indoctrination propaganda.
And just pause, you think that number can be as low as 30%?
Yes, usually it is not higher than 30%. Yes.
That's scary.
That's scary
That's
because, yes, but there is
fascinating.
always 60 or 65% of the people who do not really go along with the narrative, but who will never speak out, who will always choose the easy way and go along with the people, with this group of people that seems to have the...
Okay, so he's saying 65% of the people are just the go along to get along. I don't want to cause a wave. I don't want to, I don't want anybody to be mean to me online or whatever. Those are the people, I don't know about you all, but I'm personally still angry with them. Those are the people I'm frustrated with. I would rather, and maybe it's just my personality, but I'm a stand-up person. Like, I would rather, even if you completely disagree with me and it's a cuckoo ideology, but stick to your guns. Don't be limp-wristed, wet washcloth, whatever. Just I'm still mad about those people. I'm still mad about it. I'll let it go eventually, but I'm still mad about all those. Well, I just don't want to say anything. I'll just wear the mask because I don't want to stand out and I don't want to. No, we are in this mess because you people didn't say anything and you're still barely saying anything. Barely. I'm telling you, these people. And thank you, Sean Joe, for the cookie. Thank you so much, hon. All right.
the loudest voice. And that's why in the end, up to 95% or even sometimes even more, go along with the totalitarian narrative, with the narrative that led to the mass formation. And there is then an additional 5% that doesn't go along with it, that tries to speak out. And that's extremely important. If you understand the mechanism of mass formation, if you really understand it, then you know what this small group should do. If it makes the wrong analysis, it will be destroyed in the end. The chance is very high that it will be destroyed. If it starts from the correct analysis, it will survive. That's why it is so extremely important to understand how this mechanism works. Because I've just mentioned that mass formation makes individuals completely blind for everything that goes against what the group believes in. But there is two other characteristics that are also extremely important. And the first one is that when people are in the grip of mass formation, they seem to lose all awareness of their individual interests. They are prepared to radically self-sacrifice. That's extremely strange. And then the third characteristic, which is the most problematic, is that people in a mass formation become radically intolerant for dissonant voices.
Yes.
And in the ultimate stage of the mass formation, they will typically start to destroy everyone who doesn't go along with the masses, and they will do so as if it is their ethical duty to do so. To refer to the revolution in Iran again, I was talking to this woman in Iran, Joreh Fishtali. This conversation is available on the internet. And she told me how she has seen with her own eyes how in the last stage of the mass formation, a mother reported her son to the state, how this mother hung the noose around the neck of her son when he was on the scaffold. And when he was hung, she claimed to be a heroine for what she had done. That's the end stage of mass formation. And this end stage...
A mother killing her own son.
Yeah. And if you understand the mechanism, as I explained it in my book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, it's perfectly logical why that happens.
But yeah.
And that's why it is so extremely important.
It makes sense when you read the book.
This last stage of mass formation
it's terrifying.
can be prevented. If the small group who doesn't go along with the mass formation makes the right choice. It has to make the right choice. And then this choice has everything to do with whether it will choose to speak out or whether it will remain silent. If it doesn't speak out, it will be destroyed because the masses will move to the last stage. So it's just quintessential for this group to continue to speak out in a honest, sincere, way. And all this follows from the mechanism of mass formation. If you understand it, you'll see why the people who do not go along with it have to speak out. And that's what they explain in my book. How this phenomenon of mass formation, which is a kind of group formation, emerges under very specific conditions. So like the first and most important condition is always that many people have to feel disconnected from their natural and social environment. And that was definitely the case just before the corona crisis started. The number of lonely people peaked. Up to 40% of the population worldwide reported not to have one meaningful relationship and to only connect to other people through the internet. And from this follows the second condition. If people feel disconnected from their natural and social environment, they will typically start to struggle with lack of meaning making. To give an example from the situation just before the corona crisis, 60% of the people worldwide reported that they considered their job to be a so-called bullshit job. That means a job without purpose or meaning. And in this state, if people feel socially disconnected and they feel a lack of meaning making, they will typically start to suffer from something very specific at the affective level. They will be confronted with so-called free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression. That means a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression that is not coupled to a mental representation, a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression in which people don't know what they feel anxious, frustrated, and aggressive for. And that state is extremely aversive. If you feel anxious and you don't know what you feel anxious for, you have the feeling that you cannot control your anxiety. If you feel frustrated and aggressive and you don't know what you feel frustrated and aggressive for, you cannot take it out to someone, and all the frustration and aggression piles up in your psychological system and leads to a certain very aversive tension. And in this state, if the population is in this state, something very specific might happen. If under these conditions, a narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety, and at the same time providing a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, for instance, the lockdowns to deal with the virus, concentration camps to deal with the Jews, witch hunts to deal with the witches, and so on. If under these conditions, a narrative is distributed, disseminated through the mass media, indicating the subject of anxiety and the strategy to deal with it, then there might be a huge willingness to participate in a strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, no matter how absurd this narrative is. Simply because, in this way, people feel that they can control their anxiety. They feel that they have something to direct their frustration and aggression on.
So what I got out of the book, this is another point he's getting ready to make here. These people are so disconnected and they have nothing. And I would argue that they were driven into that sensation. Looking back at everything that was happening through all the social things, we're focused on COVID, but I would take it back to 2016. Honestly, I would take it back to there. Well, I'll go into that here in a little bit, but there is so much to unpack on this. But he spends a good amount of time in the beginning of the book talking about the connection of frequency, which really resonates with me. But he does talk, because I mean, humans are electrical beings. We generate current. That's why we use the terms vibe. Like, I wasn't vibing with them. What's a vibe? It's a vibration. It's a current. Everything that we do is through that path. So if you don't have human interaction, you are robbing yourself of one of the prime functions of humanity. It's how we connect. It's how we interact. And so many people were isolated prior to COVID. They also, it's been a slow progression in society. You can look at, there's less marriages, there's less children, there's less family units, there's more estranged family members, there's less community functions, there's less dances and places to go and things to do. Even when I was young versus now, it's dramatically less. So then you have all of these people that are unhappy, isolated, and then you lock them down. They created a perfect storm. And I will never be convinced that the tippy top didn't know what they were doing. I don't think like the local people understood what they were doing. I think they were just following what they were told to do, and they didn't want to be caught holding the bag, and they didn't want the responsibility of going against the current. But the tippy top, you'll never convince me they didn't know what they were doing. Call me a tinfoil hat wearer. That's just where I'm at with all the evidence that keeps coming out. There's just too much. So I'll let him keep going.
The first extremely important step, and then follows the second one, which is the really dangerous step. Because so many people participate at the same time in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety. They feel connected again. It is as if their loneliness disappears. They feel full of solidarity. And that's the point. They have the feeling that they fight this collective, heroic battle with the virus, and they will consider everyone who doesn't go along with them as an egoist, as someone who lacks all solidarity. And that, in itself, the strange thing is, you could say, well, what's the problem? People felt lonely, and now they feel connected again. So what's the problem? But there is a problem, because in a mass is a group that is formed not because people connect to each other. A mass is a group that is formed because each individual separately connects to the collective, meaning that the famous solidarity of the masses is never solidarity with other individuals.
Right.
It's a solidarity with the collective. And the longer the mass formation exists, the more everyone demands that everyone sacrifices all his personal interests for the collective. And that's exactly the reason why in the corona crisis, for instance, everyone was talking about solidarity. And at the same time, we accepted that if someone got an accident on the street, we were no longer allowed to help him. At the same time, we accepted that if our father or mother our parents were dying somewhere in a nursing home, that we were no longer allowed to visit them. So it was everyone had to sacrifice everything for the sake of the collective. So mass formation is extreme collectivism. It's extreme collectivism. It's the balance between individualism and collectivism that goes completely in a direction.
But there's no actual, but at the same time, the people who encourage it discourage the formation of individual relationships between people.
Always.
So the government in this country, the Biden administration, was encouraging children to turn in their parents to law enforcement if they said something that deviated from the explanation, from the corona narrative online.
They did.
So they're breaking apart solidarity between people.
Yes, they did.
Of course, there's always a feature of it.
The strange thing is that this happens spontaneously. In every group which has an extremely strong group identity, all the energy will be sucked away from the bonds between the individuals. For instance, in a military commando, if they have to do something dangerous, they will typically demand that there are no sexual relationships between the members of the group.
Right.
Simply because this relationship between the members, this strong relationship, could threaten the group in a dangerous situation.
Right.
These members could choose for each other instead of for the group. So that happens in every group with a very strong group identity, spontaneously and in a mass to an extreme extent. In a mass, all solidarity, all the love between the individuals is sucked away, and it's all injected in the love between the individual and the collective. And that's why in the end, even the strongest bond, the bond between the mother and her child, completely impoverishes, and even mothers report their sons to the state and get them killed if they feel that they are not loyal enough to the state. So it's a natural. It's a psychological process that is very logical, but that is extremely dangerous. And that's exactly why we have to try to understand it, and we have to try to understand what we can do about it.
So what we can do about it, first of all, the hair on my arms is standing up because you've so precisely described what we've all just seen. I mean, precisely. Because it sounds like this is a feature of human nature. People are this way, always. Can you think of examples where mass formation was stopped before it became totalitarianism by a small group of people standing up and saying no?
Oh, definitely. The first totalitarian systems in history were the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany in the first half of the 20th century. But there were trends towards totalitarianization at several places in the world. And in most places, they stopped.
Well, all through Europe.
Yes, they stopped. And the problem in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany was that the resistance, at a certain moment, decided to go underground and to stop speaking out in public space. That happened in 1930 in the Soviet Union and around 1935 in Nazi Germany. And within 6 months, in both countries, the destruction campaigns started. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. So there is a almost perfect correlation between the resistance that stops to speak out and the start of the atrocities and cruelties in a country. Simply because if you understand the mechanism, then you know, like mass formation is a kind of hypnosis. It's identical. It's exactly the same. In a hypnotic procedure, there is someone, a hypnotist, who focuses the attention of someone else on one aspect of reality, for instance, an object that is swinging on a chain or something, and once the attention is focused on that one aspect of reality, all the rest of reality disappears. All the rest of reality, it is as if the rest of reality doesn't exist anymore. And this mechanism is extremely strong. A simple hypnotic procedure is sufficient to focus someone's attention so much on one aspect of reality that the person won't notice anymore that there is a surgeon who cuts through the skin, through the flesh, even straight through the breastbone to perform an open heart operation. That happens all the time in a university hospital in Belgium. There is a professor, Elisabeth Vermonville, who uses this simple procedure to focus a patient's attention on something, and then the surgeon can do no matter what you want, cut through the breastbone, the patient won't notice it. So that's the power of this mechanism of the focusing of attention. Exactly the same happens in a mass formation. First, people start to deal with all kinds of emotions that are no longer coupled to mental representations. And then all these emotions, all this anxiety are focused on one point, and consequently, the people don't notice anymore that they lose everything, that they lose their health, their wealth, the future of their children, and so on. That's exactly what happens in a mass formation. So once you understand that the mechanism of mass formation is a kind of hypnosis, you understand that it is a phenomenon that is always provoked by the voice of someone, the leaders of the masses who use indoctrination and propaganda to continue the mass formation, and then you also understand that if you want to disturb the mass formation, that you have to continue to speak out, that the dissonant voices have to continue to speak out. If the dissonant voices, if the people who do not go along with the masses continue to speak out, they won't succeed in waking up the masses. Sometimes someone will wake up, but usually the people will continue to be in the grip of the mass formation. But that doesn't mean that their speech has no effect. Not at all. Their speech will constantly disturb the hypnosis to a certain extent, and it will prevent the hypnosis to become so deep that the people become convinced that they have to destroy everyone who doesn't go along with them. From the 19th century onwards, scholars like Gustave Le Bon have described that the people who are not in the grip of the mass formation that their speech has exactly this effect. It doesn't wake them up, but it disturbs the mass formation, and it makes sure that it doesn't go so deep that the masses start to commit atrocities. And in this way, that's from a strategical point of view, quintessential. In this way, what will happen is the following. The masses are always self-destructive, and they will slowly exhaust themselves. They will exhaust themselves and destroy themselves before they destroyed the people who do not go along with them. So once you understand that the first and foremost strategical principle that you have to follow is that you have to continue to speak out. And at the same time, it's also an ethical principle. As a human being,
Yes, it is.
Yes.
it's an ethical principle. As a human being, you have the ethical duty to articulate these words that seem sincere and honest to you, no matter what the consequences are. And if you do that, we have numerous examples described by Solzhenitsyn, by Primo Levi, by Viktor Frankl. If you do that, something wonderful will happen. If you stick to your ethical principles, when the world dehumanizes, you go through a very fast process of mental evolution. A very fast process of mental evolution as a human being. You start to become stronger and stronger and stronger as a human being at the mental level, and sometimes even at the physical level. If you read Solzhenitsyn, he gives us wonderful examples of how in the gulags, most people started to act in a beast-like manner.
Yes.
But there were a small minority, who went in exactly the opposite direction, who in this pool of darkness chose to try to represent humanity, and who became more and more determined to stick under all conditions, no matter how difficult it was, to their ethical principles. Solzhenitsyn gives these wonderful examples in which he describes how these people very often survived the concentration camps and became even stronger while most others died within a few weeks or a few months. Of course, it's not a guarantee, but I think that if we understand that, we understand that the process of mass formation and everything that happens now, in a certain way, has meaning and purpose. It should motivate us to understand the value of ethical principles for a human being. It should make us more determined to continue to live according to ethical principles while the rest of the world leaves them behind. So,
let me say this. One of the most amazing conversations I've ever had, and I'm so grateful that you're here, and I mean that. I'm grateful that you're here. I feel like you're speaking directly to our country. What is the difference between the people who go along, which is the majority, it sounds like, and the smaller percentage who decide, no, I'm going to say what I believe is true no matter what? What makes people to decide to take one path or the other? And can you predict it ahead of time?
no, you can't. From the 19th century onwards, from the moment psychologists have been studying the phenomenon of mass formation, it has been remarked and observed time and time again that every time a mass emerges in a society, there is a small group who doesn't go along with it. But this small group is extremely diverse and heterogeneous.
Yes.
And nobody seems to know what connects these people.
I've noticed this.
Which characteristic these people share. But in one way or another, they all make this fundamental decision, a decision that cannot be reduced to anything else. They make this decision to choose for truth speech instead of choosing the easy way and going along with a narrative where everybody believes in, of which everybody actually knows that it is utterly absurd and unethical. So, because the mass formation, that's very interesting. The reason why people buy into the narrative that leads to mass formation is not because they think that the narrative is correct. Not at all. The reason why they buy into the narrative is because it leads to this new social bond, because it makes them feel connected again. Because loneliness is the most painful state. We don't know it, but it is like that. We don't realize it, but it is like that for a human being. And it wants to escape. It wants this new social bond. And the reason why people buy into it is because it leads to all these psychological advantages.
Think about not only that they shut down the schools and what they did to the children as far as isolating, but even making sure that people couldn't go to their local park. Think about what he's saying. about the isolation and the strategy of how vulnerable it makes you mentally and physically. Because there was never a reason for them to do some of the things that they did. Like, why were they dumping sand in skate rinks? If you're outside, this is the thing, like, I would always whenever anybody would engage me because I wouldn't wear a mask or whatever in store, and I'm like, "It's an airborne virus. Unless you're gonna live your life in a hazmat suit, this is it." Like, there's no difference between the cold and the flu. They're both airborne viruses. What are you doing? Because that mask, if it worked, we would have been wearing those years ago to prevent the flu. But clearly they don't work. So what are you doing? The evil that they did. Now, take it back a little further. Let me give you another hypothesis on this. Because this is yes, this book should be taught in schools. Thank you, Duppy. Absolutely. This was a great book, guys. It really was. And if you don't want to get the book, then definitely look up a variety of his interviews. Sign up for his Substack, and you can see his work. It's phenomenal work. What I was saying about 2016. Okay, so you had all of the media screaming their heads off about orange man bad, orange man racist, orange man sexist, orange man blah blah. Pick whatever. Just, pull out that word and insert the new ist word. And there you go. Just keep doing it. Then there was Russia hoax. Okay. So all of these people constantly latching on, and it created such a division online. So think about what he's saying as far as the collectivism, about how you found other people online. You don't know them. Half of them might have even been bots. You don't know, but people felt like they were engaged and they were reaffirmed in their beliefs. It gave them that false sense. So continue on. You have Russia hoax. You have blah, blah, blah. Then you have, the next election coming. You have whatever, the fine people hoax. Then we get to COVID. You remember those memes with the NPC, the little gray heads, that all the faces are the same in the crowd? And there's the memes in stages. It's like a comic strip of them. And you have one in the beginning, and it's, orange man bad inside, and they're labeled on their head, like orange man evil. And then in the next one, it's white supremacy. And then in the next one, it's COVID. And then in the next one, it's a Ukraine flag. And then in another one, it's the Black Lives Matter symbols or whatever. They just kept at it until they just keep you in that constant state. So they're always focused on the next thing, it's so disturbing when I really sit down and draw out the lines of what they have done over the bulk of a decade. His book talks about the effects on people, even on suicide, and how it leads to, the ultimate thing. The government, you will no longer have control of your body. You can't even choose to die if you want to. The government will control everything. He talks a lot about vaccine passports because he lived in Europe. He had to deal with all that. So they just keep switching it out. What's the next thing? Well, here we are. This is why I chose this one, folks. We're at an election year. I want everyone to be able to see the playbook and see it very clearly. And if you can, use tools like this to explain it to people and help them, because there's a lot of people out there, that 65% that at this point, it doesn't feel right, but they're not really sure what to do. Or, these are the people that we have to reach. The crazy 20 to 30%, I don't know what to tell you. Let's focus on the ones that are just confused and quiet. Let's try and be a bridge and help them understand. That is always my goal with these. But this is why I chose this guy. I really liked the book. I really liked him, and I found his research very valuable. So let's keep going a little bit.
It couples the anxiety to an object. It provides an object at which people can direct their frustration and aggression. It leads to this new connectedness. So that's the reason, this new social bond and the effective advantage. The reason why people continue to go along with the narrative, no matter how absurd it becomes. You could even say more. It's just the same like people in a football stadium, all sing the same song, not because they think it's the most beautiful song in the world. No, it's because the song connects them with the other people. And and you could even say more. The more absurd the measures become, for instance, the corona measures, the more they will be applauded by this part of the population that is really in the grip of the mass formation, simply because the measures have the function of a ritual. And what is a ritual? Ritualistic behavior is always behavior that has no pragmatic meaning and that demands a sacrifice from the individual, a sacrifice through which the individual shows that the collective is more important than itself. So people, without knowing it.
So what was a vaccine? What was the point of getting that shot? Because it didn't work. They knew it didn't work. The research showed it. They knew. They hid the research because it didn't work. They knew it didn't stop a spread. It didn't do anything against the thing. So what was the point? Were they just forcing everybody to do a ritual? Were you just proving your allegiance? What were we doing, folks? What were we really doing? Like, I know we all have theories of the why. I have many myself. But your average person, why'd they go along with it? Why was it suddenly okay? It's fascinating, really.
We live in a time in which we think the materialist view man in the world believes that rituals have no meaning and no function, but they are essential for us. And in totalitarianism, without knowing it, people engage completely in rituals, but they don't realize it. And these rituals are rituals of death. People blindly sacrifice everything just to escape their profound feeling of social atomization, to escape their profound feeling of loneliness and disconnectedness. It's a kind of suicidal ritual that is committed. And that's exactly why many people expected that if the corona measures became more absurd, that people would start to wake up. But that usually didn't happen.
No,
simply because people don't understand that unconsciously these measures have the function of a ritual. And the more absurd they are, the purer they fulfill the function of a ritual.
That's exactly right. The more unlikely, the more compelling.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then you have to get, I think this is, again, one of the most amazing conversations I've had ever. But it does raise the question of motive. Like, why did Robespierre do that? Why did Lenin do that? Why did Hitler do that? Why did our own government, not all of whom are evil, a lot of good people, why did they do this?
Yes, we have answered the question, I think, why the population goes along with the narrative. Yes. Because there are all these psychological problems and they are solved by the mass formation. But the second question is, why does the elite do it?
Yes.
And I think throughout the last few hundreds of years, we have seen two things developing alongside each other. On the one hand, the population got in a state where it became more and more vulnerable for mass formation. And this simply has to do with our mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world. Something in our rationalist, scientific ideology disconnects people from the social natural environment. That's what I describe in detail, really in detail, in the first 5 chapters of my book. I describe how it is our obsession with rational understanding, our delusional belief that the mystery of life, the essence of life, can be understood and reduced to the categories of our own rational thinking. It's that delusional belief of the human being that disconnects it from its environment more and more and more and more. And that's exactly the reason there was more and more disconnectedness in the population. That led to the mass formation, which became stronger and stronger and stronger, and in the end made it so strong that totalitarian states could emerge. But at the same time, another process happened at the level of the elite. This mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world created a new elite, an elite which rationally tried to understand the psychological processes in a society, and then used this rational understanding to manipulate and control the population.
Oh, yes, they did.
And that's why, immediately after the French Revolution, that means after the fall of the Ancien Regime in France, immediately we saw the emergence of modern indoctrination and propaganda. Napoleon was the first one who established a Bureau d'Opinion Publique, a kind of office for propaganda. And then, in the beginning of the 20th century, like 100 years later, we saw already these enormous propaganda machineries of the First World War, and it became worse in the Second World War, and
Yes,
now
it
it's even much more worse.
It's out of control
Our entire
now.
public space is saturated with indoctrination propaganda constantly, simply because it's strange. If you read the works of the founding fathers of indoctrination propaganda, such as Lippmann, Rotter, Bernays, then you hear how these people think in the following way. They say, well, since modern democracy, the political leaders are not true leaders anymore. They have to be elected, meaning that they have to follow the masses. So they can never control the masses. And at that moment they decided, and you can read this
I don't think
literally
they
in the
think
works
like
of the
that.
people I just mentioned, Lippmann,
At all.
Bernays. At that moment, these guys decided, we need constantly to manipulate the masses, or otherwise they will govern the country and not the politicians or not us. So the elite relied more and more on indoctrination, propaganda, manipulation, psychological operations, brainwashing, and so on of the population, just to manipulate the masses from behind.
To subvert democracy, to end the promise of democracy.
Yes, of course,
which is the people will rule.
of course. That's the problem. No, exactly. So why do they do it?
To
why
maintain
do they
power.
do it? You know, that question should be answered, I think, in a very nuanced way. Many people think that totalitarianism is all about power and that it's all about the money. And to a certain extent, that's true. But the ultimate motivation of totalitarian leaders is always ideological in nature.
Yes.
Believe me, it's ideological. Like
Stalin
like a
actually
cult?
believed in Marxism.
Of course, and he wanted to sacrifice everything, all his money and all his power, if he could just reshape society according to his Marxist ideas. That's so typical for totalitarian leaders. They want to sacrifice everything.
And they actually believe it, though.
They usually don't believe the narratives they use, but they believe the ideology blindly. So, like in this case, I think here in our situation, for me, the ideology at work is a technocratic transhumanist ideology.
Yes.
And in order to impose this ideology to society, people use, the elite uses, the large global institution uses all kinds of narratives to try to entice the people to go along with this ideology. And these ideologies, well, these narratives are like the climate narrative or the terrorism narrative or the corona narrative. And usually, the totalitarian leaders usually don't believe.
I'm just going to say at this point, when I was reading the book and he was going into this, the first thought I had was the Patriot Act in 9/11. Just thought I'd throw that out there because that's what struck with me. And thank you, Trick Pony, for the cookie. Good to see you tonight. And hey, Karen Hare, good to see you. All right.
They fanatically believe in their ideology. They really believe that their technocratic transhumanist ideology will create like a new paradise for the human being. But they usually don't believe the narratives they use.
Right.
They believe so blindly and fanatically in their ideology that they think it is justified to lie, cheat, and manipulate the population, to convince them to accept all these ideological changes they try to impose to society. So we have to distinguish, I think, if you ask the question why they do so, in the end, I really believe they do so because they believe they have this obsessional drive to impose their ideological fiction to society. That's the root cause, I think, or the root motivation of totalitarian leaders. And I know that's not very popular. Most people prefer to believe that it's all about the money. That
Because I know some of them, and I agree with you 100% that there's a sincerity at the bottom of it. So how far along is the West in what appears to be this move toward totalitarianism?
Well, in 1951, Hannah Arendt said that we've seen the collapse of fascist totalitarianism, she said, and we will soon witness the collapse of communist totalitarianism. But she said a new totalitarianism will emerge, the ultimate totalitarianism, and that is the technocratic totalitarianism, a kind of totalitarianism which is not led by gang leaders such as Stalin and Hitler, but which is led by dull bureaucrats and technocrats. And I think
Hannah Arendt wrote that in 1951?
In 1951 she wrote that. I mentioned it in my book. And that technocratic totalitarianism is the ultimate manifestation of the kind of ideology I just referred to, this kind of materialist, mechanist ideology, which believes that the entire universe is like a set of elementary particles, atoms and molecules that all interact with each other according to the laws of mechanics, and that can be perfectly understood in a rationalist way. If you start from such a view on man and the world, then the logical conclusion is that this universe machine and this machine-like society should be led not by democratically elected politicians, but by technocratic experts who possess the rational knowledge to make the machine run as smoothly as possible. So that's the delusional belief of the technocratic system. It's a logical consequence of our rationalist mechanist view on man and the world.
It's a replacement of God.
As we have to,
is what it really
the
is.
real enemy, for me, is not the elite, it's that ideology, that rationalist view on man and the world, that on the one hand created a new kind of population which was so vulnerable for mass formation, and on the other hand created an elite which delusionally started to believe that it could manipulate, cheat, control, try to steer everyone in society. So that at the root cause of the problem is this mechanist ideology, which always presents itself as science, but which has nothing to do with science.
But how did you, I mean, given your job description, I mean, you're a prime candidate for believing that. Everyone in your world believes that. Why don't you believe that?
I have no idea. I was never I had never a great talent to believe what other people believed. In one way or another, I always try to think with my own head. And I think like, well,
what did your parents do? Like, what world were you raised in? Why were you told it was important to think yourself?
I will tell you something about my parents. My father didn't want me to go to university because he said, you will see, he said, the institute that pretends to represent the truth in society, you won't find much truth there, he said. And so I decided to go to university against his will.
Had he gone to university?
No, but he was he was a very intelligent person who read a lot, really a lot, every day in the morning and the evening, but who had like a contempt for all kinds of degrees, academic degrees. He said like the only reason why you should gather knowledge is because you have a passion to know, a real passion for knowledge, and not because you want to have a certain degree. And he also,
piece of paper.
In his opinion, a human being had to work with its hands and then also read and learn something in its spare time.
I think I would like him.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So, but I went to university, and actually now that when I became a professor, I could understand them more and more. That I'm happy that I went to university, but I'm also disappointed I don't think that well, maybe that applies to society in general, but I don't think that most people are motivated by a search for truth. No.
How you become very public with these views, and the response to them, at least online, has been enormous. And you become famous in this country anyway. I have no idea how you're regarded in Belgium, but how do your colleagues at the university feel about what you've said?
Most react in a very defensive way.
Yeah, it didn't go well.
I have to say that, well,
Trying to see if it picked. I'm watching the platform to make sure we're up because it's still glitching. And I have no idea why. Be patient with me, please. Did Rumble glitch out, guys? Mods in the chat? Because I'm watching Pilled live. Hey, Peg. Love you, darling. Okay. All right. Okay, well let's keep going before anything else happens, and I'll watch the stream carefully, fam. Here we go.
Mass formation, the cause of mass formation is loneliness, but mass formation itself, if you think about the mechanism that I just explained, because it sucks all this energy away from the social bond, creates even more loneliness.
Yes.
And that's puts society in a condition where it is even more sensible, more vulnerable for mass formation. So if one large-scale mass formation emerges, there is a good chance that a second one will emerge, which
I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's doing this. I know everything went right back up. It's got to be something with Restream. Because there's nothing wrong with the computer. I'm running, everything else is running fine. So it's got to be the stream platform. Thank you, Filter Dog, for the cookie. Thank you so much. I know. All right, let's keep going before something happens.
Guide them toward utopia.
Fingers crossed. Here we go.
What should be our attitude toward people? Like, what's the correct way to view?
we will have to educate them in such a way that they start to see that that they start to develop the capacity to connect to the world in a different way. I will quote René Thom, one of the most famous mathematicians of the 20th century and one of the founders of complex dynamical systems theory. He said, this part of reality that can be understood in a rational way, and he was a scientist, a top scientist, this part of reality that can be understood in a rational way is very limited. And the rest of reality, we can only understand by empathically resonating with it. And what René Thom said there, by empathically resonating with it. So he differentiated between two different kinds of knowledge, a rational knowledge and a kind of resonating, empathic knowledge of what happens around us. And there were so many traditions in which they were aware of this differentiation. For instance, the samurai tradition in Japan said that if you learn the martial arts, or no matter what other art, or no matter what other craft, they're first.
Damn it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm quickly losing patience. Okay, really going to wrap it up now. So, psychology of totalitarianism. I'm so sad because there was a lot more I really wanted to get into with this topic. But the stream will I think that's like the 8th time it's done it. So, anyway, this is so fun. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call it quits for tonight. We will continue next week. I'll see if I can wrap this up. I'm looking at doing another book on the economy and tying these two together. So I'll continue and bookmark this. Thank you, everybody. You know what? I'm not even going to try and tempt the outro. I'm not even going to try it this time. I don't think it'll work.